Armin Rogers' voice dripped with mockery, his hands gripping the leather steering wheel of the black Cadillac Escalade. His eyes gleamed with a dark kind of satisfaction. From inside the car came bursts of cruel laughter. In the passenger seat, his mother, Eleanor Rogers, sat with a smirk that curled like victory across her perfectly lined lips. She had the look of a woman who had never lost, who would burn down an entire world just to prove she was right. In the back seat, his sister Sabrina leaned against the tinted glass, her expression triumphant, her eyes blazing as though she'd just won a long-plotted game. The SUV screeched across the blistering asphalt, roaring down the empty Arizona highway, leaving me in a cloud of dust and echoing laughter. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The desert heat pressed against me like an invisible weight. My heart pounded violently, my arms clutching my swollen belly where my daughter kicked faintly inside me. 8 months pregnant. My body screamed to run after them, but what would be the point? They had taken everything, my phone, my wallet, my bag. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan. I should have known. This trip was supposed to be our last getaway before the baby came. Armin had insisted on a week by the ocean in San Diego. My family needs to be there for this moment, he said. I'd hesitated, but gave in. Because back then I still believed in the version of Armin I thought I knew, the man who once swore he loved me more than anything. But it was all a lie. The truth hit me at that gas station. I'd stepped out of the restroom, adjusting the hem of my maternity dress, wincing at the pain in my back. I looked up and saw them through the glass. The Rogers family. All 3 of them inside the SUV, pointing, laughing, watching me. Armin. My voice cracked as I ran. The Escalade lunged forward, tires screaming, and through the open window his words slashed across the heat. Enjoy the walk. Then they were gone. Dust, heat, silence. And me, a pregnant woman stranded on a desert highway. You all right? The voice came from behind. Deep. Steady. Concerned. I turned and saw a man in a faded denim jacket, his rough hands marked by years of hard labor. Behind him towered a massive 18-wheeler, its diesel engine rumbling like a guardian beast. His eyes narrowed as he took in my trembling frame, the tears streaking down my cheeks. They left me, I whispered. His gaze hardened, jaw tightening. Come on. Let's get you inside. He guided me toward the small gas station diner, his steps solid, reassuring. A woman with kind eyes hurried over as soon as I stumbled inside. Oh, honey, she murmured, easing me into a booth, sliding a cold glass of lemonade in front of me. No way we're letting this slide. The man, Ethan Lawson, folded his arms and glanced toward the security cameras bolted to the ceiling. His voice was low but steady. We got it all on tape, he said grimly. And I'll make damn sure people see it. 4 years earlier, if anyone had told me that the man who once held my hand under the stars would one day leave me abandoned on a highway, I would have laughed. Back then, Armin Rogers seemed like everything I had never dared to hope for. We met at a charity gala in Denver, a night filled with glitter and polished smiles, where I was only present because a friend had offered me a spare ticket. I was out of place from the start, wearing a borrowed gown and shoes that pinched, standing among a crowd of people whose wealth was stitched into their very posture. And then he appeared, moving through the room with a kind of ease that made everyone else blur into the background. When his eyes fell on me, I almost turned to see who he was really looking at. But it was me. Always me, or so I believed. You look like you don't belong here, he said, his tone teasing but soft. I laughed nervously and admitted, because I don't. He grinned, and somehow within minutes, I felt as though the ballroom, the glitter, the diamonds, had all vanished, leaving just the 2 of us in conversation. He asked about my students, my passion for teaching literature, my dream to create an arts program for kids who had never known opportunity. He didn't interrupt, didn't condescend, he simply listened, as if my world mattered to him more than the millions his family controlled. By the time the gala ended, and he walked me to my car beneath the icy glow of Denver's winter moon, he brushed a strand of hair from my face and whispered that I deserved to be seen. I carried that sentence in my heart for months, like a charm. The first year of our relationship was dazzling. He sent flowers to my classroom with notes that made my colleagues whisper behind their hands. He whisked me away on weekend getaways to Aspen cabins and California vineyards, where he looked at me as if no one else existed. My students adored him, my friends envied me, and for a while, I allowed myself to believe in the fairy tale. But the illusion began to crack the moment he introduced me to his mother. It was New Year's Eve at their sprawling estate, a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. Eleanor Rogers was elegance carved from steel, her sequined dress catching the light as though she were meant to be the centerpiece of the world. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, but her eyes were sharp, dissecting me in an instant. "A schoolteacher," she said with a faint smile, her diamond bracelet flashing as she lifted her glass. "How quaint." I tried to explain, to tell her that I worked with underprivileged kids, that I believed in giving them hope, but her expression never softened. She only nodded, as though acknowledging a detail she would later dismiss. That night, for the first time, I felt like I had walked into a game I didn't know the rules of. Sabrina, his younger sister, made sure I never forgot that I didn't belong. Unlike Eleanor's cutting elegance, Sabrina preferred cruelty wrapped in sweetness. She invited me to brunch one spring morning, insisting it was casual. I arrived in a sundress and flats, only to step into a room filled with women draped in Chanel and Dior. Sabrina smiled at me like a cat playing with its prey. "Oh, didn't I mention the dress code?" she said, her voice sugar-coated. The other women watched, their silence worse than laughter. My cheeks burned, my stomach knotted, but Armin squeezed my hand and whispered that I should ignore them. For a time, I clung to that whisper. Everything changed the day I told him I was pregnant. I had expected surprise, maybe even fear, but I wasn't prepared for the cold detachment that flickered across his face. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice flat. From that moment, the distance between us grew day by day. The morning coffee he once placed on my nightstand disappeared. The affectionate touches vanished. The man who once looked at me like I was his whole world now looked at me like I was an obstacle. And his family followed his lead. Eleanor's comments turned sharper, reminding me that this wasn't what she had envisioned for her son. Sabrina escalated her cruelty from whispers to open mockery, pointing at my belly and smirking, asking if I'd be able to squeeze into any decent dress ever again. The moment I should have understood everything came during the very road trip that ended with me standing abandoned in the heat. Armin insisted that Eleanor take the front passenger seat, while I, 8 months pregnant, was pushed into the cramped backseat. "She gets car sick," he said sympathetically, but the words were hollow. I sat there, knees pressed against the seat in front of me, listening to the muffled laughter between him, his mother, and his sister. Their whispers floated back to me, sharp and deliberate, and I realized that I wasn't his partner anymore. I was the joke. And the joke was about to become a punishment I never could have imagined. Inside the diner, I tried to steady my breathing, my hand pressed protectively against my stomach, but the tremor in my chest refused to ease. The air smelled of fried food and coffee, and the low hum of an old jukebox filled the silence between my shallow breaths. Ethan sat across from me, arms folded, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking every so often to the security cameras above us. Carol, the woman who had brought me lemonade, hovered nearby like a protective aunt, her brows furrowed as if she were ready to march outside and drag the Rogers family back by their hair. I wanted to believe this was just a nightmare, something I would wake from, but the ache in my swollen body and the sting in my chest told me this was real. Then Carol's teenage son, Tyler, nearly choked on his soda. His face went pale, his fingers trembling as he turned the screen of his phone toward me. "You're not going to believe this," he whispered. I stared, and my stomach knotted. There it was, Armin's latest post, already racking up likes and comments. The caption read, "Finally free. A real family vacation. Some people just can't handle the Rogers lifestyle. Beach-bound, no drama." The photo was worse. Armin lounged by a pool, sunglasses on, a margarita in his hand. Beside him, Eleanor reclined on a chair in a designer swimsuit, her lips curved in that same knowing smirk. Sabrina posed at the pool's edge, holding up her drink like a victory toast. They looked carefree, almost radiant, as though abandoning me in the desert had been nothing more than a funny anecdote. I scrolled through the comments, each one slicing deeper than the last. "Good for you, man. Pregnancy hormones are no joke." Dodged a bullet. Bro, relax and enjoy, nothing worse than a clingy wife. Queen Eleanor, always right. My throat burned. They weren't just laughing at me in private anymore. They were inviting the world to laugh along. Ethan leaned over, his brow darkening as he read. Damn, he muttered, his voice low with disgust. These people are rotten. His fingers tightened around his phone. I know a guy who works with Channel 7 News, he said, already scrolling through his contacts. Used to be a detective. He's got connections. We're not letting them get away with this. Carol placed her hand gently on my shoulder, her eyes fierce. Sweetheart, you need to get ahead of this. If you stay quiet, they'll keep spinning the story their way. They'll make you look like the problem. Her words struck something inside me, something raw and trembling but also angry. I realized she was right. If I stayed silent, their version would become the truth. Within an hour, the sound of tires crunching gravel filled the air outside. A news van pulled up, and out stepped a reporter with sharp eyes and a determined stride. She introduced herself as Jennifer Parker, notebook in hand, microphone ready. Lauren Rogers, she asked, though it was less a question than a confirmation. I nodded, my throat dry. Tell me your story, she said. The storm began as a ripple, a small segment on the local news that evening. But by the time the footage aired, the ripple had turned into a wave crashing across the state. The video from the gas station cameras was damning. On the screen, I emerged from the restroom, one hand on my aching back, confusion and fear written across my face. The Escalade rolled forward, the window lowered, and Armin's voice rang out, "Enjoy the walk." The laughter from inside the car was unmistakable. Then the SUV sped away, leaving me frozen in the frame, abandoned under the merciless sun. The anchor's voice grew sharper as she laid out the facts. Lauren Rogers, 8 months pregnant, was left stranded in 102-degree heat with no phone, no money, and no way to call for help. Meanwhile, her husband and in-laws posted photos from a beachside resort celebrating their freedom. Next came the cut to Armin's post. The anchor read the caption aloud, "Finally free. A real family vacation. Some people just can't handle the Rogers lifestyle." The backlash was immediate. Comments flooded in, this time not in Armin's favor. "You left your pregnant wife in the middle of nowhere. You're a monster. So this is what family values mean to the Rogers clan? Divorce him, Queen, and take everything." Hashtags with my name began trending. Strangers who had never met me were now calling for justice. The Rogers family's perfect image began to crack. Rogers Capital, the financial firm that had built its empire on prestige and investor trust, suddenly found its social media flooded with questions. Does your company endorse this behavior? Will the board take action against an executive who abandons his pregnant wife? That night, lying in a hospital bed under observation for dehydration and stress-induced contractions, I watched the coverage play on loop. My mind was foggy, my body exhausted, but I couldn't stop watching. The world was finally seeing what I had lived through for years. And somewhere, deep inside me, a new thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, the nightmare wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of a reckoning. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale air, the beeping monitor beside my bed reminding me that my body was still fragile, still reeling from the heat, the stress, the betrayal. I lay there in silence, my hands resting on the curve of my belly, my daughter's faint kicks the only comfort I had. The television on the wall replayed the story on a loop, my face frozen in shock on the gas station footage, Armin's sneer, the laughter. I should have turned it off, should have closed my eyes, but I couldn't. Watching it over and over felt like proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy. The world saw what they had done. The door burst open, and Nicole stormed in, her cheeks flushed, her hair wild as though she had run straight from her car. She clutched a tablet in her hands, her eyes shining with something fierce. "Lauren," she gasped, "you need to see this." She dropped the device onto my blanket, her finger already swiping across the screen. It leaked. Their emails. I blinked, confused, my heart lurching as lines of text filled the screen. At first, it was little things, snide remarks from Eleanor about how I didn't fit their family, comments about my emotional instability and lack of refinement. But then the words shifted into something darker, colder. My chest tightened as I read Armin's name at the top of a chain. We need to be strategic about this. A divorce isn't enough. We need full custody. We'll document her instability, her mood swings. She's overly emotional, easy to spin. Courts lean toward mothers, but with the right narrative, with the right influence, we can flip it. The firm's resources can build an airtight case. She won't stand a chance. I couldn't breathe. Nicole scrolled further, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes locked on mine as if bracing me for impact. "Read this," she said softly. It was a text from Sabrina, just 2 weeks earlier. "Once the baby is born, we'll build the case. We'll show she's unfit. Mom knows the right people. With your connections, Armin, we'll get custody. She'll break, and she won't be able to fight." My hands shook as I clutched the tablet, the edges digging into my palms. My throat burned, bile rising. This hadn't been a moment of cruelty born out of anger or spite. This had been planned. Every laugh, every whisper, every cutting remark had been part of a larger design. They hadn't just wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to erase me. They wanted my child. Nicole's voice cut through the ringing in my ears, sharp and steady. "Lauren, they were never going to let you raise your daughter. They wanted you to unravel, to break, so they could point and say, 'See? She's unstable. She doesn't deserve custody.'" I pressed my palm against my belly, desperate to feel my daughter's movement. She kicked, faint but insistent, as if she too understood the battle we were already fighting. "They'll regret this," I whispered, my voice raw but steady. "They'll regret ever thinking they could take her from me." The following morning, the headlines shifted again. Rogers Capital released a statement, vague but damning. "We are reviewing Mr. Rogers' actions and his future within the firm. Our company upholds the highest ethical standards, and we take this matter seriously." The meaning was clear. Armin was no longer an asset. He was a liability. His name, once a golden ticket, was now toxic. Investors demanded answers. But even as the firm scrambled to contain the fallout, another story broke. Nicole was the one who told me, gasping as she scrolled through her phone. "Oh my God," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Lauren, it's happening." The anchor's voice filled the room a moment later. "Breaking now, the FBI has launched an investigation into the Rogers Foundation for allegations of financial fraud and misuse of charitable funds. Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at the Rogers estate in Boulder." The screen flicked to live footage. Black SUVs rolling into the gated driveway, agents in jackets marked FBI flooding past the gates. Cameras caught the chaos. Neighbors watching, reporters shouting questions, Eleanor's empire collapsing in real time. Nicole pressed her hands together, practically vibrating with energy. "This is so much better than I imagined. They thought they could destroy you, but look at them. Look at what's happening." But I barely heard her. My heart wasn't in their downfall, it was in the steady rhythm of my daughter's kicks, in the knowledge that I was no longer powerless. The Rogers family thought they were invincible, untouchable, shielded by money and influence. But the truth was out now, and the world was watching. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my child. And I would win. 1 week later, I held my newborn daughter against my chest, her tiny body curled into me, her breath warm against my skin. The chaos of the past weeks seemed to melt away as I inhaled the sweet, almost miraculous scent of her hair. Lily Grace. That was the name I whispered as her small fingers wrapped around mine with a strength that startled me. She was proof that I had survived. She was proof that no one, not Armin, not Eleanor, not Sabrina, could take away what mattered most. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines and the gentle cooing sounds Lily made in her sleep. Outside those walls, the world was on fire with news of the Rogers downfall. The family that had once strutted across society pages now had their empire crumbling around them. Eleanor's foundation had dissolved, its assets frozen pending the federal investigation. Associates who once clung to her side now swore they had no idea about the fraud she had built her empire on. Sabrina had disappeared from social media, her mocking posts wiped clean, though screenshots circulated endlessly. And Armin? Roger's capital had officially severed ties, his accounts frozen, his name dragged through every headline as a stain on the firm's reputation. The man who once held all the power now had nothing but shame. But the biggest change wasn't their destruction, it was what my story had sparked. On the television mounted in the hospital room, I watched as the governor of Colorado stood before cameras and signed a new law into effect. The Mitchell Act, they were calling it, after me. His voice was steady as he addressed the crowd. It is now a felony to deliberately abandon a pregnant woman in dangerous conditions. No woman should ever be left defenseless and vulnerable. This law ensures that what happened to Lauren Rogers never happens again. Tears filled my eyes as I kissed Lily's forehead. The pain, the humiliation, the fear, all of it had led to this moment. My suffering had been turned into something bigger, something that could protect others. For once, I wasn't just a victim of the Rogers family's cruelty. I was a catalyst for change. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Jennifer Parker, the reporter who had first aired my story, stepped inside with her familiar notepad in hand. She smiled warmly when she saw Lily in my arms. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "Exhausted," I admitted, my lips curving into a tired smile, but happy. She nodded and took a step closer. "I won't keep you long, but the country has been following your story, and people want to know, what's next for you?" I looked down at Lily, at her tiny fingers still gripping mine with such determination. "Moving forward," I said softly but firmly, "I'll raise my daughter. I'll teach her that strength isn't about money or power or influence. It's about standing up even when the odds are stacked against you." Jennifer leaned in slightly, her eyes searching mine. "And if you had one message for others, for women, for mothers, what would it be?" I didn't even need to think. "Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to our greatest strength," I said. "My daughter will grow up knowing that her mother didn't just survive, she fought back. And she helped change things for the better." The camera zoomed in then, capturing Lily's hand curled tightly around my finger, her grip unshakable despite her size. And for the first time in a long time, as I sat there holding my daughter, I felt truly free.